So the question becomes, on your exams, you're not going to be told necessarily which kind of hypothesis test you're using. So let's put this all together, shall we? So if you're testing the proportions P, actually the difference in proportions for multiple samples, with independent sampling, that's going to be what we learned in 11.1, right? I guess I should make a note over here. This is for 2 groups, right? 2 samples, that kind of thing. 2 populations. Right? Same with down here. This whole chapter's when you're dealing with 2 samples, right? So down here, when you're dealing with P with dependent sampling, all right, so both of these use the Z distribution, so I should have mentioned that. And then this one's the one we learned in 11.1, this one we learned in 11.1. This one was page 5 of the inferential statistics cheat sheet. Let me double check that. Yep, there it yep, 2 prop Z test. Yep, page 5. And then the other one's page 6. So that's that. Okay. And then what distribution is it? They're both normal distributions, so Z distributions, that's what that is. Now, the only thing is, this one we're going to do by hand. StatCrunch won't do it for us. If you're in StatCrunch, you can do this. Stat, then proportions, pick 2 sample. So let me show it to you. Oops, there we go. Stat, proportions, 2 sample, and you have to choose data or summary. For us, it's almost always summary for proportions. 1 sample stuff was what we learned in chapters 9 and 10. And then 2 sample stuff is chapter 11. All right, so that's that. Oop. Get back. All right, and then the other one we learned was for dependent sampling. That was that weird one. The example that we used was heaven and hell, but it was slightly different than a lot of the other ones we've used in that the formulas were strange. We had to use the absolute value in there and stuff. We learned it in 11.1. It's on page 6 of your cheat sheet. Again, you're just given that cheat sheet during your test, so you don't have to memorize it. And we would do this one by hand. All right, then we also tested independent sampling when we had 2 samples or populations, and we had dependent sampling when we had 2 samples or populations. So let's look at this one first, even though it's lower in the list. So there's this one we learned in 11.2. That was when it was dependent sampling, paired data. It's on page 7 of your cheat sheet. You use the T distribution when you're working with means. So you go to Stat, go to T statistics. All right. So 1 sample is what we learned in chapter 9. You can make confidence intervals and hypothesis tests that way with chapter 9. Paired is what I'm talking about right now from chapter 11. And chapter 10 also was 1 sample. Paired is a chapter 11 too. That's when you have like pre and post test, or with cell phones, without cell phones, right? But there was a relationship. It was the same people. So that's paired. Okay. And that's what I wrote right there, paired. And then the other one we learned was stat 2 distribution 2 sample. So let me go back there and see if that. So stat T statistics 2 sample, and you have to choose, was it data or summary? Were you given an actual 2 columns worth of data, then you pick data, or you have summary? Keep in mind, you'll have to put the data in yourself in here in StatCrunch if you're going to use the data portion. All right, so there's that. There's some other formulas that you need to know as well. There's this one right here. That was for the sample size when you have a prior estimates. And this is sample size when you don't have prior estimates. And there was a typo. It should have been 0.5. So double check your notes. Make sure it's 0.5, not 0.25. That was a mistake. And while I'm on the subject, when you go to your inferential statistics cheat sheet, go to the front. Let's see, right up here, remember that one, we've run into that typo before. It should be 0.5 on this portion right here. And then don't forget, we've already learned these. This was the one from right here. That's the one from 11.1 for making a confidence interval. And you can get that in the same place. You go to stat, go to proportions, and then here, this was dependent sample. That's the paired one. So if you go to stat, go to T statistics paired. That's this one. You can make a confidence interval in there. And this one's stat, T statistics, 2 sample. So again, these are right on your cheat sheet. You don't have to memorize them. You have to know when to use which one. And make sure you fix the typo on that. That should be 0.5. Alrighty. We are all set. I better save my Excel file. We didn't actually have a lot to do in StatCrunch and Excel on this particular set, so we only have 5 tabs or so. So I'm going to save it and I'll close it, and that way I'll be able to email it later. And we are done with Chapter 11. I'll meet you back here for Chapter 12, which is going to be, guess what? More hypothesis tests. You guessed correctly. All right, I'll see you then.